think there's a philosophical understanding, there's knowledge, but there's a lack of acceptance to that change of consumer behavior. And so we know that change is hard, scary, painful. That's human behavior. And what happens when things get hard, scary? We tend to cling onto what we know even tighter, as opposed to letting go and gaining a whole new perspective that will guide us forward into the future.
This week, we're talking with James Robert Lay of the Digital Growth Institute and the Banking on Digital podcast. James Robert lays some hard truth about complacency at financial institutions, the threat that presents all of us in society given the essential nature of community FIs, and most importantly, what all of us leaders can and should do about it. This is a pointed episode, but one I think we can all benefit from. With us today is James Robert Lay. He's the founder and CEO of the Digital Growth Institute, host of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast, and author of the books Banking on Digital Growth and the more recent Banking on Change, the Leader's Guide to Achieving Exponential Growth in the Age of AI. James Robert, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Well, Rich, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to connect and have a great conversation with you.
So I think it's probably worth looking back at maybe your background and the path that kind of brought you to this place where you're advising and being a thought leader to financial brands.
Yeah, so it all started on a dark, stormy Thursday night.
As all great stories do, yes.
And it really was a dark, stormy Thursday night around, I think it was 2003. I was at an American Marketing Association event at the University of Houston Clear Lake, and Thomas Hass, the VP of marketing at JSC Credit Union at the time, walked in and said, "We're looking to get our website redesigned, redeveloped. Can you help us out?" Because at the time, about a year earlier, I had started a web design company. This is early internet. And I was like, absolutely. And I had no idea what a credit union was. I had never worked in financial services. And so sure enough, a few months later, started working with Thomas and the team over at JSC Credit Union. And I realized that, wow, there's a big opportunity to help these credit unions come into the age of the internet. 2002, 2003. I mean, there was no social media back then. There was no YouTube. Online banking was literally just coming online for many. And so flash forward, here we are 21 years later. And if we look back, my goodness, how much things have changed since then, maybe how much things haven't changed as well. Because in 2012, I transformed my own business model from being a digital agency to moving up to do more advisory work as a digital anthropologist, studying the intersection of marketing, sales, technology, and human behavior.
And so, some very radical things have happened to that industry in the meantime. And I'm sure that shaped an awful lot of what you've done and your approach. But what do you see are like the biggest differences between now and then? Not just from a technological advancement standpoint, but just like how the industry is shaped, maybe what you're being asked to do from your clients.
Well, I would say let's take an external perspective of what's driving that transformation. And to your point, we're not going to talk about technology. Let's look at the transformation of consumer behavior, how people shop and buy financial products. If we go back to the early 2000s, once again, online banking was in its infancy. Now, online banking, mobile banking is the primary way that people access the transactional relationship with money. People then are asking, leaders are asking, well, what do we do with these branches? I say, well, the branch is not dead per se, but there are a lot of decisions that are being made, particularly if someone is looking for a new checking account or looking for a loan product. There are a lot of decisions that are being made long before they walk into a branch, if they walk into a branch at all. So what's driving that are the beliefs and the behaviors that consumers have around making purchase decisions that are largely being influenced by other digital retail experiences.
And like that's always an interesting element of this. If you start to think about branches as much a distribution channel as it is a brick and mortar retail play. That's always been one of the strong suits, particularly for one of the smaller community institution, credit union, that kind of like local presence. You know, we're here in the community. You can always have access to us. And you saw that very much, you know, to quote Hemingway, kind of, you know, this change in what consumers are looking for happened very slowly, and then all of a sudden, particularly around COVID, and this kind of need of, I don't necessarily have to walk in and talk to somebody to do everything that I need to do to kind of get the advice that I need. How,
Right.
how is that? How is that you've seen that received by your clients, or received by the industry in general? Is it adoption? Is it kicking and screaming? Is it denial? Like what has been the predominant, I guess, attitude towards that?
It depends on how old you were in 1994. And the reason I use 1994 as an inflection point, that was the year that the internet reached the mass consciousness of humanity. And so one of the very first things that I do when working with executive leadership teams and even boards of directors is I ask a very uncomfortable question, typically within the first 5 minutes. It's like, okay, how old were you in 1994? And you can see people start to squirm in their seats a little bit. And I said, no, I'm being serious. And this has nothing to do, this is not an ageism question. It's a matter of perspective, which is how you view the world, as context and framing. Because, for example, if you were just say 30 years old in 1994, here we are 30 years later, you're now 60. Where if you were, say, 10 or 5, or you weren't even born in 1994, your context, your perspective of in your relationship with the internet and how you shop, buy, perceive the world around you is going to be vastly different than, say, someone who was 25, 30, 35 years old. And so perspective shapes reality. And I find that there is a resistance to change. There is a resistance to accepting that consumers have, I think there's a philosophical understanding. There's knowledge, but there's a lack of acceptance to that change of consumer behavior. And so we know that change is hard, scary, painful. That's human behavior. And what happens when things get hard, scary? We tend to cling onto what we know even tighter, as opposed to letting go and gaining a whole new perspective that will guide us forward into the future.
Well, I mean, does that necessarily take a fatalistic view that says if you're a Gen X, or God forbid, a baby boomer, you have no business being in a consumer facing business? Or is it just more, this is going to require more self-reflection and empathy on your part?
I don't think it's a fatalistic view at all. I do think it's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity, to use a Yoda-ism, to unlearn what you have learned. If we look at how Socrates, for example, defines wisdom, wisdom is I know nothing. And so it's, what do we need to let go of from a belief standpoint so that we can reshape and reframe our perspective going forward into the future? I'm one that, to grow in a period, in an age of exponential change, and we are in that period now, particularly with the rise of AI, we must be a continuous lifelong learner. Otherwise, we risk the world's going to continue to change, but we're going to be still stuck in a particular perspective. And I do know that there are leaders out there who are continuously challenging their own beliefs. They are doing the hard work, the deep work. They're asking the tough questions. Jim Marous is one I think of often, and with this, because Jim is continuously challenging his own status quo. Because when if we go back and we look at his own personal journey, he has continuously reinvented himself time and time and time again. And it shows as he's continuously transformed his belief that, well, what I thought to be true 5 years ago, 10 years ago, That might no longer be true. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay letting go of what I know so that I can create space to gain a new perspective and guide a new path, chart a new path forward.
So, are you seeing that as maybe not a differentiator for best in class, but quickly becoming, hey, this is table stakes? Like, if you're not able to at least reinvent your view of what you're doing, let alone tangible things like your offerings, your business model, et cetera, you're dead. There's no way you're going to be able to continue to be relevant in this world.
You might survive. I think it's going to be very hard to thrive. And let's use a real practical example of this and take the context of time and shrink it down. Netflix was founded in 1997. We know their original offer was direct to consumer DVD mail by mail. Just 10 years later in 2007, they had transformed their business model away from DVD. They still had that, but they brought the streaming model online. And if you go back and you start Googling what the brand perspective was of consumers, many were upset that Netflix had made this change. But the leadership at the time knew that, yeah, change is hard, scary, painful, but we're going to see this through because we believe that we have to transform our own business model. Otherwise, we risk getting disrupted ourselves. So flash forward 2007, go out to 2013. Netflix transformed the business model again. So now you get a 6-year period of transformation because Netflix goes from just being streaming to, in 2013, that was the year that Netflix launched the very first made for Netflix production, which was House of Cards. And as we know, Netflix today, they're more of a production house than they are just a streaming media platform. So the idea of continuous reinvention, continuous transformation is table stakes in a world full of exponential change that is being driven by technology. It's not change for change sakes. It's changing to continuously be relevant as the competitive landscape changes, but be more specifically as consumer beliefs that drive consumer behavior that continues to transform.
So if you're seeing this as something that's approaching an existential risk for brands, particularly in consumer financial services, what has been the reception been, as you know, as you've kind of had this now 2-decade view of the market? Is it they're pulling this out of you to help them do it, or it's I'm kicking and screaming because this is how I've done it since, you know, we were founded 100 years ago, which is not uncommon for a lot of smaller financial institutions?
Yeah, that puts me in an existential crisis right now because since publishing Banking on Change, I've been thinking about my own relevancy and why I have done what I've done. I've done what I've done because I truly believe that financial services, particularly community banks and credit unions, it's a noble business. You can truly make a positive impact on the lives of people within the communities that you serve. But at the same time, the work that we do, where we go in and we guide people through the Banking on Digital Growth program, we start off by secret shopping their website. We help them get a digital growth blueprint and a strategy that guides them forward, and then we help them build their digital growth engine. Each one of those steps requires change and transformation, whether that's digital technology, so quote unquote digital transformation, whether that's marketing transformation, sales transformation, cultural transformation, brand transformation. Each one of those steps requires change and transformation. But what I'm noticing is that there's a resistance to that. And it appears to be, and it could just be my own perspective, that resistance is growing louder. I think about one particular organization that I recently worked with. We went in, we did the diagnostic work, and it's been probably a good 8 months. Check in on them. No progress is being made. Just take a step. You know, and when we start to dig deeper and you start asking some questions, you realize what's holding them back. It's FUD. It's fear, it's uncertainty, and it's doubt. And one of the best ways to overcome fear, uncertainty is doubt. Is just take action. Move. You know, dedicate 20% to creating the future. Keep the 80% maintaining the status quo, but start to carve off time, energy, resources, capabilities to create the future. Otherwise, the future is going to arrive, and the future is just going to be the predictable past based upon the decisions that we're making right here in the present moment.
So, I mean, are you seeing that kind of inertia or resistance is because there isn't a fear, like they don't have that existential fear about them, or it's kind of like boiling the frog slowly, right? It's coming, but it may not be on my watch. It might be on the next executive's watch, or maybe even the person after that.
I would say it's that. And I would say and this is where I have a lot of empathy. I hear from a lot of leaders, from marketing teams, sales teams, leadership teams. Listen, James Robert, I am so tired. I'm exhausted. I am burned out. Like, since COVID, it feels like it's been nonstop. And when are we going to get back to just normal? I was like, well, what is normal? And normal to them is pre 2020. And if that's what we're waiting for, I don't think we're ever going to have that experience again. I remember early on when COVID, it's like we started 2020, and in January of 2020, February of 2020, it was like just another year. It's just a new decade. But it's just another year. And then the world shut down. And it's like everyone's cheese was moved literally overnight. But it was a forcing function. And it happened to everyone. And you didn't have a choice. And now there is a mental exhaustion. There's a physical exhaustion. There's an emotional exhaustion that I'm starting to feel from the teams that I've been working with. And they're like, you know what? Can we have a break? Yeah, you can. But change, the speed of change, and it's all perception. I don't perceive that slowing down. And there's a lot of, I think, philosophical conversations that need to be had because, for example, I saw from Peter Diamandis, who runs Abundance 360, which is a think tank, that by 2040, he has a prediction, by 2040, there'll be more humanoid robots walking around than there are cars. That's a huge idea right there. That what does that look like? How is that going to make people feel if there are humanoid robots walking around doing activities that maybe a human being once did? The repeatable. Well, how's that going to make people feel? It's what was written about back in the 1970s, the idea of the uncanny valley. So we're in a very interesting time of change and transformation. We've been here before, but our perspective doesn't allow us to understand what happens next. And when I say we've been here before, if we go back and we were alive, let's say at the turn of the century, and we were born in, like, say, the 1850s, think about all the changes and transformations that you would have seen by the time that you were 40, 50 years old. You would have seen transportation go from horse and buggy to train running through your town in the late 1800s, to seeing cars now running through your town, to seeing airplanes flying overhead. It's a huge, massive transformation in a really relatively short period of time, but that speed of change is happening faster. And the challenge is that technology is moving at an exponential rate, but we as people, we as human beings, we are linear thinkers. So unless we just stop and pause and review and reflect of what has happened, and then think about where we can go next or what the possibilities are, then we're going to be surprised by all the changes that are really truly around the corner that we just can't perceive right now.
So let me flip that around a little bit. meaning from the standpoint of let's assume that that's broadly true. That is, it is a generality that there's an inertia, there's a static nature to a lot of how banking and finance works, particularly outside of the top four, maybe even the top 20 banks in the country. Does that not present an opportunity then? Meaning, if you're in a sea of other alternatives, other brands that are slowly, maybe atrophy isn't the right word, but not actively trying to differentiate themselves, does
Mm-hmm.
that not give you an opportunity? I mean,
It
if you're
does.
looking at this general trend, and if we use say just assets as a proxy for this, right? We've seen the top four getting even bigger, and
Mm-hmm.
that was even accelerated by the regional crisis last year. And de novo bank creation is effectively zero at this point and has been for some time. And if you kind of look at that and think, okay, well, that says that industry is probably ripe for some consolidation to go on. Well, if there's upheaval, there's opportunity. There's going to be winners and losers in that. And if we think of it that way, what how should leaders be thinking about it to say, if in the next whatever time period we want to look at, 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, how do you position yourself today, or how do you orient your strategy or your organization or your technology or your human capital, however you want to think of it, so that you're more likely to come out on top in that situation? If you're going to be the acquirer, not the acquiree, you're going to
Yeah.
be the one that is able to command a premium for your positioning in that, because that absolutely happens. There is absolutely the ability to command a premium as a financial institution, even in the credit union space, where your acquisitions kind of mean something a little bit different. There's certainly the winners and the losers in those type of situations. So how do you think about that?
I think getting really clear on why you're doing what you're doing and who you're doing it for. Um, I see there's still this idea that we can help everyone. And to your point, you're seeing the big nationals taking more market share, but that if they're taking more market share, who are they leaving out? For example, when it came to helping small to mid-sized businesses during COVID with PPP, it was the community institutions that stepped up. That's why I'm a big believer in community financial brands, whether it's a community bank or a credit union. They're the backbone of the local economy. So it's getting really clear of who you're creating value for and how you're helping them. But the idea of the quote unquote local economy, that perspective, that idea changes, because what does community mean these days? It's not just a borders, zip code, city, state. I believe that there are opportunities within certain niche markets or certain niche verticals to really deepen expertise. And you're starting to see some of that. I think of the brand Hustle that was recently launched for the non 9 to 5 workers, the gig economy, basically. We're seeing that with Bank MD, focused around physicians. We're seeing that with Roger, with Jill Castilla coming out of Citizens Bank of Edmond. So we're starting to see some movement, momentum. I think about what Corey LeBlanc and Keith Casello are doing with Locality Bank. They're getting really, really clear of who they're helping, and then they're creating the positioning and the messaging and the go-to-market and the product all around those unique needs for that unique community. But it's planting a flag in the ground, and that takes courage to plant the flag in the ground, saying, this is why we do what we do, this is who we do it for, and this is how we're going to help them. And to me, one of the greatest, and you're right, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity. And the opportunity comes from it's I call it banking on expertise. In this age of AI, I have a hypothesis that I've seen, if we go back to the early 2000s when we first started this conversation, we've seen the pendulum swing almost all the way, and it really kind of reached the pinnacle of what I call team tech. It reached the pinnacle of team technology with the pandemic. But as we're moving further into the age of AI and just observing human behavior at a macro level and conversations and seeing what's happening, I have a sneaking suspicion that the pendulum is going to start swinging back to team humanity. It doesn't mean that technology is going to go away, but in complex buying journeys like financial services, particularly around lending products like mortgages, small to mid-sized business lending, the ability for an individual, a leader, a lender, an advisor to unlock, capture, and amplify their expertise, their knowledge, their perspective through human-centered content is going to allow them to differentiate themselves from the commoditized masses. That is just, that commoditization is going to continue to accelerate with the rise of all of the generative AI.
So, if you're a leader and you're bought in on this, you're like, I 100% agree. This is definitely something we need to be doing. We're not currently doing it today. We see the resistance to change, the kind of maybe self-pity that comes around, buying into FUD an awful lot. How do you advise they go about that? Like, what's really the hard part? What's the thing that breaks the log jam so that you're not take one step and then do nothing with it, right?
Yeah.
You're really able to kind of capitalize this and have that longer term view of we're making an investment almost like this is R&D, right? That we have like that type of investment horizon for what we're doing.
The 90-day growth method is a methodology that I've been teaching organizations. I wrote about this in Banking on Change, and it changes the operational model. It changes the way that we think, which changes the way that we do and we operate. And there are 4 seasons, if you will, of the 90-day growth method. There's the learning, thinking, doing, and reviewing. And whenever I ask teams, where are you spending the most of your time out of these 4 seasons right now? And we're stuck doing what we do. So I said, do you have a framework, or do you have a system? Do you have a process that helps you break free from what you've been doing, to review what you've done, to then learn and gain insights, perspective, knowledge through those experiences, to then think about how you can do even better over the next 90-day period of time? And that creates ongoing iteration, that creates ongoing optimization to continuously stack wins over an extended period of time. And it's the point of stacking wins that I want to just cue in on here, which comes from reviewing and reflecting. If we fail to measure progress, that's where we start to feel tired, exhausted, burned out, overwhelmed. Because all we're doing is, it's like, what do we got to do next? What do we got to do next? What do we got to do next? I think about a team that I recently worked with, an executive team, and they went through the Banking on Digital Growth program, and they had just finished up their Clifton Strengths Finders. And what we found, or what they shared with me from Clifton, was this is a team of achievers. They're all achievers. And I said, well, when was the last time that you sat down and actually reviewed what you've done? Like, just measured your progress. I said, we've never done that. So well, let's do that right now. What's been going well for you? Where have you been winning? What are you excited about right now? What have you learned? What are you looking forward to? They're like, it completely changed the energy and the perspective of the room, because it's like, wow, we've done a lot. We just haven't paused to actually think about that. So I said, do you think it would be possible that once a quarter, you just pause, you review, and reflect of the progress you made before you think about what you got to do next quarter? What have you done? I said, yeah. So when we checked in with them, like, how are you feeling right now? We're feeling better than we did last quarter. Great. Keep measuring that progress, and that will continue to increase your commitment to move forward with courage and confidence. Otherwise, you might fall back into what I wrote about in the book, the cave of complacency, and that's where people get stuck.
So, is there something magic about 90 days? Like, have you seen that as being we're taking you to a longer time period as you begin to think about this, or to a shorter time period? Like, when we think about things like this, it's an annual planning cycle and how we're going to do investments or spend in things like training or certain initiatives that are going to be longer term. God forbid you have to do a core transplant, for example, right? Something along those lines. Is there something about that it's kind of in this Goldilocks range?
Yeah, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry at around the 90-day period. And that's at the point to where it's long enough to get things done, but it's also long enough to have distractions pop up. People go down different paths, different rabbit holes. We lose focus. Life happens. And so to have the intentionality to connect back every 90 days, this is more anecdotal, but if you think about and you follow the seasons, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter, those work on a 90-day cycle. So in essence, a 90-day period of time is following the cycles of nature that have withstood the test of time. And so just every 90 days, back to your point, if we're doing this annually, well, a lot can change over that annual period of time. What if we were able to pivot? What if we were able to optimize based upon what we're experiencing now versus waiting 12 months to come back? Because 12 months is a long time in a period of exponential change. We're shortening things down and we're able to iterate. This is this idea of 90 days or even taken down to a shorter cycle of 30 days. You see this quote unquote agile methodology in the world of technology. This is a natural operating rhythm, even down to 2-week cycles, 1-week cycles. But in financial services, it's let's plan out the whole year and let's execute against that. And then we're going to come back to the next year and we'll figure out what we're going to do then.
So if we want to talk to somebody right now that's in an organization who is maybe very much aligned, but lives with a level of frustration in that they don't have the agency or the authority to make the decision, or maybe they are the boss and they're dealing with like a board, for example, that's maybe a little bit more intransigent about it and less willing to do something that seemed to be risky. What advice would you give to somebody who finds themselves kind of stuck between what their ambition or what their gut tells them and maybe the hard edges of the institution that they're in?
Well, there are 4 steps that lead to human transformation. And the very first step is just to simply see things differently. And that might be yourself, or that might be helping others that you work with on your team or your board of directors. Give them some perspective. So education comes into play there. That's the season of learning, if we're coming back to the 90-day growth method. Because when you see different, that's when you're going to begin to think different. You can't unsee what you have seen. And so when you see different and you think different, one of the questions that I ask leadership teams is like, well, what's going to happen next? And then they look a little confused, like, well, James Robert, of course, when I see different and think different, I'm going to act different. I'm going to be different. I'm going to do different. Really? Are you? Because do you know that there are things that you need to do different right now based upon your own knowledge and perspective? Like, yeah. Why aren't you doing them? And they pause. And I go, here's the thing. But this is the secret to quote unquote human transformation. To bridge the gap between thought and action comes down to one thing. It's feeling and it's emotion. So an individual, which we have to start with the individual, and then the individuals make up a team, but the individual, an individual's desire, their feeling, their emotion to do something different, to be different, to act different, has to be greater than their desire to maintain the status quo. And that's where sometimes inspiration can come in. Like you bring someone in from the outside and they get inspired, they get motivated. But inspiration is like a light or a candle. It's going to eventually burn out. It's going to fade. Motivation is like a muscle. It's going to eventually tire. And what do we find ourselves? Find ourselves doing the exact same thing that we've always done, because that's the habit. That's what we know. That's what feels safe. That's what feels comfortable. And so if you see things differently through education, you think differently through quote unquote strategic planning every 90 days, how do you measure the emotive side of this so that to ensure you don't fall back on behaviors and really establish new patterns, new habits? That's the coaching element. So coaching is what guides people through that next stage of change and transformation so that they can achieve that next level of growth. And when you're going through that process every 90 days, by the time that you get through the end of the year, you've already gone through 4 iterations of this. Like, wow, we have done a lot. We have come a long way. And then you set the intention for the next year or the next quarter, and you just start breaking it down, and you go through that whole process of learning, thinking, doing, and reviewing.
So that posture of continuous improvement seems to be the kind of foundation of everything that you're talking about from this standpoint, from the personal side about learning and continuing to be able to reinvent yourself and your view of what you do and why, to operationally how you're functioning as an organization and how you're implementing that.
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
you've given us a lot to think about and a lot of kind of introspective things to look at that maybe aren't always fun from that standpoint. James Robert, thank you very much for sharing with us today. If anyone is, and I'm sure a lot of people are, interested more in about you or what you do or your writings, where's the best place for them to go?
They can go to jamesrobertlay.com, or you can get the new book, Banking on Digital Growth, by going to www.bankingondigitalgrowth.com.
And we'll put links to that in the show notes. James Robert, thank you very much. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun today.